Just recently, the decision was made to change the date of the Deep South's oldest rivalry, which takes place between Auburn and the University of Georgia. Usually this game is played within the first 2 weeks of November, and they decided to switch the Tennessee and Georgia game. Tennessee and Georgia will now be played in November, and Auburn and Georgia will be played in late October. Once again, it's K2 the GOAT for Vernon Speak Sports, mostly talking about Auburn football and the rest of the SEC. Want to give a shout out to my fearless and true gang, War Eagle. It's basically the same-ish but different date for the Auburn Tigers and the Georgia Bulldogs. It absolutely does not matter when you play this football game. The rivalry is intense for so many different reasons, which we're going to discuss very briefly on this particular podcast. Now, when I think about it, I was just recently in Athens because I work very close to Athens. Matter of fact, I work out in Bethlehem, Georgia, which is about 30 minutes from Athens. And I had the privilege of going to one of our locations, which is on the campus of Georgia. And as I was there, it just took me back to when I was a student at Auburn. And there was a crossing, I can't think of the name, I think it was Clayton Street or something like that in Athens. And it just brought me back to the corner of Thatch and Magnolia where Toomer's Corner is. And, all those different landmarks in Auburn. And it was eerily similar. The campuses are eerily similar. You have Epps Bridge Road in Athens, which is really similar to Shook Jordan Parkway in Auburn. Matter of fact, Epps Bridge Road is synonymous in Athens, Georgia, and University of Georgia. You can't say you went to the University of Georgia and don't know where Epps Bridge Parkway is and Epps Bridge Road is, and you can't say that you're a student in Auburn and not know where Shook Jordan Parkway is. Now, there's so many eerie similarities to these two particular schools. Auburn is located only 31 miles actually from the Georgia state line. As a matter of fact, there are a lot of people that can drive to Auburn and get to work in Atlanta just as fast as someone who lives close to Atlanta because of the traffic of Atlanta and because of the proximity of Auburn from Georgia. And, if you look at it demographically, student-wise, about 13% of the Auburn undergraduate student population are actually from the state of Georgia. Okay. And then when you look deeper, when you start looking at the actual football team for Auburn, about 33 of those players are from the state of Georgia. And two of the biggest staples coaching wise for Georgia, Vince Dooley, who led Georgia to its only national championship and several SEC championships, as long as serving as the athletic director and obviously the head coach, winning over 200 games. Vince Dooley, you cannot talk about the University of Georgia football without mentioning Vince Dooley's name. And guess where Vince Dooley played quarterback in the 1950s? Auburn University. Conversely, you have Pat Dye, who will remain a legendary fixture at Auburn University, still a consultant on campus now, was the head coach in the 80s, bringing Auburn to relevancy in college football. Several SEC championships, probably missed an opportunity at a couple national championships. Both coaches, Vince Dooley and Pat Dye, coach Heisman Trophy running backs. Vince Dooley coaching Herschel Walker, and Bo Jackson was coached by Pat Dye. Pat Dye also serving as athletic director and head coach. And guess where Pat Dye went to college? Pat Dye was an offensive lineman at Georgia. Both of these two coaches going to the rival school and fitting right in. You know why? When you come to the two schools, you can't help but to, because the two schools are eerily similar. You can easily say Jordan-Hare Stadium is between the hedges, because guess what? It's hedges that surround Jordan-Hare Stadium, the jungle. When Georgia comes to Auburn, it's almost as if they're playing at home because the stadiums look so much alike. the campuses look so much alike. And guess what? The student population and alumni look so much alike. Why? Because a lot of them are from the same place. When you look at the football team, a lot of those guys were in competition with one another, even from the recruiting trail. You got Auburn coming into the school. You got Georgia coming into the school. In Gwinnett County, I mean, it's just a fierce battle for those guys between Auburn and Georgia. So when you look at this, I don't think it's going to be any different. If anything, you're going to get the best of the two schools, because in that October stretch is when the peak of the two teams start to really unfold. If you look at this past season, that's when Georgia really started to come onto its own late October. Auburn kind of having a shaky season, but having a nice win over Texas A&M late in the season. But I think you're going to get the best of both teams during this particular time. I think it changes nothing as far as the intensity of the rival. I don't think one school benefits any more than the next. If anything, it will help with the SEC kind of sort of getting some kind of picture of where this thing could be going as far as who's going to go to the SEC championship game, because Georgia and Auburn historically has had a lot to do, or has had a lot to say as to who the eventual SEC champion representative for the SEC West is, and SEC East for that matter. Not as much for Georgia, but very high implications in this game for Auburn. I'll go out on a limb and also say this is great to get a little separation between the Auburn-Alabama game, which is affectionately known as the Iron Bowl, because you got to think about this thing not only from a physical standpoint, but from an emotional standpoint. When you have Auburn is the only team that I know of that is lucky enough to have two very, very bitter rivals. I think Florida might be the only other team, as Florida faces Georgia, bitter rival, and they face in-state rival Florida State. That Florida State rivalry is not nearly as intense as it used to be, but that's the only school I can think of right offhand that has that type of rivalry set up as emotionally intertwined as the Iron Bowl and the Deep South's oldest rivalry. As a matter of fact, one of Auburn's best running backs in history was from Georgia. Ronnie Brown was from Cartersville, Georgia. Brad Lester from Georgia as well, Gwinnett County. So there, Owen Pappoe, who is going to be coming to Auburn, one of the best recruits in Auburn history, is going to be coming as a linebacker from guess where? Grayson, Georgia, which sits about 50 minutes, maybe even less, depending on which way you go, from the campus of the University of Georgia. So I really don't think this changes anything. It's just it changes the date. It also changes the trajectory of when this game is played, as far as how usually when the University of Georgia and Auburn plays one another, I mean, injuries start to become a factor. But I think now you get to get these two teams playing at peak times, and I think that is great for this particular rivalry. And I don't think, people keep saying, well, Auburn was crying about it, but this was a mutual agreement between the two universities, because Georgia did not have to accept. Once again, it's Case to the GOAT for Vernon Speak Sports, mostly talking about Auburn football and the rest of the SEC. I want to give a shout out to my fearless and true gang, War Eagle, and to all the Georgia fans. How about them dogs?